A quiet Alabama town. The kind where everybody knows everybody. The kind where people leave their doors unlocked at night. A place where trust isn't just a word, it's a way of life. And at the heart of it all, a woman admired, respected, untouchable. Judge Emily Thompson. A woman who spent her career upholding the law, delivering justice, ensuring that criminals paid for their sins. A woman who swore to protect what was right. But behind closed doors, inside the very home she shared with her husband, a decorated police officer, the law was not being upheld. A crime was not just being committed, it was being orchestrated. Carefully. Patiently. With a precision only someone well-versed in the justice system could pull off. Michael Thompson, a man who dedicated his life to the badge, a man who believed in honor, in truth, in protecting his community. A husband who thought he knew the woman he had vowed to love until death. And in the end, it would be death that fulfilled that promise. But it wouldn't be his enemies that took him down. It wouldn't be the criminals he had put away. It wouldn't be a random act of violence. It would be something far more chilling. It would be the woman who once whispered she loved him. What makes a person cross that line? What pushes someone from respected judge to calculated killer? What makes a woman who sentences criminals become one herself? It wasn't rage. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a moment of weakness. No. This was planned. Thought out. Designed for one reason and one reason only. And she didn't do it alone. Someone was waiting in the shadows. Someone she trusted. Someone she wanted more than the life she had built. Tonight, we are taking you deep into the story of betrayal, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. A story that will make you question how well you truly know the person lying beside you. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't the ones behind bars. Sometimes, they're wearing the robe of justice. Sometimes, they're sleeping in your bed. Stay with us. Because what happens next will shock you. And when it's over, you'll never look at the justice system the same way again. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is a story you won't want to miss. Emily Thompson wasn't just any judge. She was a woman people looked up to, a woman whose name carried weight in courtrooms and legal circles, someone trusted to make decisions that shaped lives. She had the power to decide who walked free and who spent years behind bars. She wore that black robe like a shield, the final voice in so many cases. People saw her as fair, disciplined, a symbol of justice. But outside of the courtroom, in the quiet corners of her private life, she was making decisions that no law could justify. Michael Thompson had spent nearly 2 decades serving and protecting. A respected officer. A husband who believed in loyalty, who believed in his wife. A man who had seen the worst of humanity but never imagined the real danger lived under his own roof. His death wouldn't come in the line of duty. It wouldn't come from a standoff, a desperate suspect with a gun, a high-speed chase gone wrong. No. His killer wasn't a nameless criminal. His killer was someone who kissed him goodnight, who sat across from him at dinner, someone who knew exactly how to take him down. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about an argument that got out of hand. It was about something darker. Something personal. A secret Emily thought she could protect. A secret that was worth more to her than the life of the man she had once promised forever to. And she wasn't going to do it herself. She wasn't going to pull the trigger. No, she knew how the system worked. She knew what mistakes got people caught. So, she found someone who would do it for her. Someone who had nothing to lose. Someone who wanted her just as badly as she wanted him. It was the kind of case that made headlines. A judge, a cop, and a hired gun caught in a triangle of lies, deceit, and cold-blooded murder. A case that shook the very foundation of the justice system, that made people question the ones they trusted. If a woman sworn to uphold the law could so easily break it, if a judge could turn into a murderer, then what did justice even mean? What drove Emily Thompson to risk everything? What made her decide that the man she had built a life with needed to die? And how did it all go so wrong? Because she had a plan. She thought she was in control. But in the end, the very system she worked for would be the one to bring her down. Michael Thompson was the kind of officer people trusted. The kind who never backed down from his duty. He had spent years patrolling the streets, taking criminals off them, and making sure his town was safe. He was the one people called when they were in danger, the one who showed up when things went wrong. He believed in the law, in right and wrong, in the idea that justice always won. He carried himself with pride, with discipline, with the belief that he was doing something good. But what he didn't know was that the real danger wasn't on the streets he patrolled. It was inside his own home. It was the woman he had promised to love, the woman who sat across from him every morning, the woman who smiled at him while planning his murder. Emily Thompson had spent years making a name for herself. She had built a reputation as a fair judge, someone who followed the law without bias, without hesitation. She was respected in the legal world, trusted to make decisions that determined the fates of those who stood before her. But behind the image of the perfect judge, the devoted wife, the woman people admired, there was another side. A side she kept hidden. A side she knew could never be exposed. She had secrets, and one of them had a name. Robert "Bobby" Lee was no stranger to crime. He had spent time behind bars, knew what it meant to live on the other side of the law. He had a past filled with mistakes, a history that put him in and out of the system. But that was before Emily. Before she found him. Before she gave him something he had never had, power over someone who was supposed to be above him. A judge. A woman who should have seen him as nothing more than another case, another file in a courtroom. But instead, she saw something else. Something she wanted. And Bobby? He saw an opportunity. It started with a glance, a conversation that went too far, a moment that should have never happened. But once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Emily wanted him, needed him, in a way that made everything else, her career, her marriage, her life, fade into the background. And Bobby? He wanted what she could give him. Freedom. A way out. A life where he wasn't just another felon, another forgotten name. They had something between them, something that shouldn't have existed, something that grew until it became dangerous. And when Emily decided that Michael was in the way, Bobby was the one she turned to. She knew what he was capable of. She knew he had nothing to lose. She knew he would do whatever she asked. And she asked for one thing, Michael Thompson dead. But there was someone else. Someone who saw the cracks before anyone else did. Detective Sarah Collins. She had worked her way up in the force, built her career on instincts, on knowing when something didn't add up. She wasn't the kind of detective who let things go, who ignored the details others missed. And when Michael Thompson, one of their own, was found dead, she knew something wasn't right. The pieces didn't fit. The evidence didn't line up. And when she started pulling at the loose threads, what she found was a story darker than anything she had ever seen. A respected judge. A convicted felon. A murdered cop. And a plan that should have worked. But something went wrong. And now, Detective Collins was going to find out why. Emily Thompson knew she had to be careful. She had spent years studying cases, analyzing every detail, seeing what mistakes got criminals caught. If she was going to get away with this, she needed to plan it right. It couldn't look like a murder. It had to be something random, something unpredictable. Something that wouldn't lead back to her. Her relationship with Bobby Lee had started quietly, in stolen moments, behind locked doors. It was dangerous, reckless, but she didn't care. She had spent years being the perfect wife, the perfect judge, living by rules she no longer wanted to follow. Bobby gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time, control. With him, she wasn't a judge, a wife, a woman bound by expectations. She was someone else, someone free. But that freedom had a cost. Michael. She had tried to ignore it at first, tried to pretend that she could live both lives. But it wasn't enough. Michael was in the way. And she had made up her mind, he had to go. At first, she and Bobby talked about it like a joke. Like it was just a thought, an idea thrown into the air. But it wasn't a joke. Not really. And Bobby was listening. He knew she meant it. And he was willing to do whatever it took to keep her. But Bobby wasn't the one to pull the trigger. He couldn't be. That was too obvious, too risky. They needed someone else. Someone who wouldn't be traced back to them. That's when Emily found the hitman. She had spent years sending men like him away, knowing exactly what kind of people would do a job like this. He had a record. He had no connections to her, no ties to Bobby. He needed money, and he didn't ask questions. That was all that mattered. She gave him the details. The time. The place. The way it had to look. A home invasion. A random act of violence. A tragedy that no one could have seen coming. The night it happened, everything was set. Emily had made sure Michael was home alone. She had left earlier that evening, making sure people saw her. She needed an alibi, something solid. She was careful, calculated. And when the call came, she played her part perfectly. Michael had no chance. The intruder had come in through the back door, forced entry. At least, that's how it would look. He had a gun, a stolen one, untraceable. He knew exactly where Michael would be, alone in the living room. He didn't struggle. There was no time. Just a single shot. Quick. Clean. The neighbors heard it first. The sound of a gunshot, then nothing. Silence. Someone called 911. The police arrived within minutes. But it was too late. Michael Thompson was dead. Emily got the call not long after. She made sure she answered with just the right amount of confusion, just the right amount of panic in her voice. She rushed to the scene, tears in her eyes, playing the role of a devastated wife. The officers who had worked alongside Michael were in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was one of them. A man who had faced danger on the streets, only to be killed in his own home. His fellow officers stood in silence, disbelief written on their faces. Friends and neighbors gathered outside, whispering, trying to understand how something like this could happen. The investigation started immediately. The crime scene was processed. The story was exactly what Emily had planned, a break-in gone wrong. A robbery that ended in murder. Nothing more. But something wasn't right. Detective Sarah Collins had seen enough crime scenes to know when something felt off. And this? This didn't feel random. This felt like something else. Something planned. Something personal. And she was right. Because behind the grief, behind the tears, behind the carefully crafted story, there was a truth that Emily Thompson was trying to bury. A truth that wouldn't stay hidden for long. The case was reported as a home invasion gone wrong. That's what the initial police report said. A break-in, a robbery, a tragic loss. Officer Michael Thompson, a dedicated cop, taken down in his own home by some unknown intruder. The crime scene had all the signs: forced entry, ransacked drawers, a single fatal gunshot wound. It looked like a random act of violence. A senseless killing. But Detective Sarah Collins wasn't convinced. She had worked too many cases to take things at face value. Something about this crime scene felt too neat. Too staged. The way the back door was broken didn't sit right with her. The items scattered across the house looked more like they had been placed there than actually searched through. And then there was the biggest red flag: Michael Thompson, a trained officer, was found sitting on the couch, shot from close range. No sign of struggle. No defensive wounds. No weapon near him. It was almost like he hadn't expected any danger at all. Collins kept her suspicions quiet at first. She knew better than to jump to conclusions. But in her gut, she felt it, this wasn't a simple home invasion. This was something else. And she was going to find out what. She started with the basics. Surveillance footage, neighborhood canvassing, questioning witnesses. The usual steps. But nothing pointed to a random break-in. No strange vehicles spotted that night. No reports of other burglaries in the area. No evidence of stolen items. It was almost as if the intruder had come for one thing only, Michael. Then came the first real crack in the case. Collins went through Michael's phone records, looking for any recent threats, conflicts, or suspicious activity. That's when she noticed something odd. A series of texts from his wife, Judge Emily Thompson. She was out of town when it happened, that much was clear. But the messages? They weren't what she expected from a worried wife. In the hours leading up to the murder, Emily had barely spoken to Michael. No check-ins. No goodnights. Just silence. And in the days after. No desperate calls to friends. No frantic messages about the investigation. Just, calm. Almost too calm. Collins decided to dig deeper. She pulled Emily's financial records. At first, nothing stood out, until she looked closer. A recent withdrawal. A large one. Cash. Taken out in increments over the past few months. Carefully spaced out. Just enough to avoid suspicion. But why? Then came the name, Robert Bobby Lee. A convicted felon. A name that had no reason to be tied to a respected judge. But there it was. Traced through phone records, burner numbers, hidden accounts. Emily had been in contact with him. Not once. Not twice. But for months. Long phone calls. Late-night meetups. Money transfers. Collins ran Bobby's history. Drug charges. Armed robbery. Assault. A man with nothing to lose. A man with a past that didn't mix with someone like Emily Thompson. But then, the puzzle pieces started coming together. Bobby wasn't just some criminal Emily had been in touch with. He was something more. He was her lover. The revelation hit the department hard. A judge. A respected woman in the legal system. Secretly involved with a convicted felon. And now, her husband, an officer of the law, was dead. Collins moved fast. She brought Emily in for questioning. At first, Emily played the role perfectly, the grieving widow, the heartbroken wife. But Collins had been doing this for years. She knew when someone was lying. And Emily? She was lying. The details in her alibi didn't add up. She claimed to have been at a hotel hours away at the time of the murder. But security footage showed she had left earlier than she said. Her credit card records placed her in a location not far from Bobby Lee's known hideouts. And then, there was the biggest break. One of Bobby's associates, a man picked up on an unrelated charge, gave Collins exactly what she needed. A confession. Bobby had been bragging about the job. About how easy it had been. About the money Emily had promised. About how they had planned it for months. The news exploded across the media. A judge. A police officer. A convicted felon. A murder-for-hire plot. The headlines wrote themselves. The community was in shock. People who had known Emily for years couldn't believe it. The legal world was in chaos. A judge, someone who had handed down sentences, now accused of planning a killing. The case was no longer just another murder. It was a scandal. A betrayal. And it wasn't over yet. Because Emily Thompson was still denying everything. She wasn't going down without a fight. But Collins wasn't done with her yet. The truth was coming. And there was no way to stop it. The trial began in a packed courtroom. Every seat was filled, every hallway crowded with reporters, legal analysts, and spectators who wanted to see how the case would unfold. It wasn't just another murder trial, this was a story of power, betrayal, and justice turning on one of its own. A judge accused of plotting the death of her husband. A convicted felon tied to her in ways no one had imagined. A police officer, a man who had spent his life upholding the law, gunned down in his own home. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out their case with precision, piece by piece, methodically dismantling the defense's narrative. The affair, the secret meetings, the money, everything pointed to one conclusion. Judge Emily Thompson and Bobby Lee had orchestrated the killing of Officer Michael Thompson. The motive was clear. Emily wanted out of her marriage, but not in a way that would cost her reputation, career, or financial security. A divorce would have been messy, would have exposed her affair, would have risked everything she had built. Murder, on the other hand, was cleaner. At least, that's what she had thought. The prosecution presented the text messages, thousands of them. Late-night conversations, whispers of love, coded discussions that, when examined closely, painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Then came the financial records. The large withdrawals, spread out over time, all leading up to a final cash payment made just days before Michael's murder. And then, the nail in the coffin, the testimony of Bobby Lee's associate. A man who had no reason to lie, no reason to fabricate a story. He told the jury everything, how Emily had approached Bobby, how the plan was made, how the money exchanged hands, how Bobby had carried out the hit exactly as planned. The defense fought back, but it was an uphill battle. They tried to paint Emily as a victim of manipulation, arguing that Bobby was the real mastermind. They claimed the affair was exaggerated, that Emily's connection to Bobby was nothing more than a series of bad decisions. They questioned the credibility of witnesses, pointed out minor inconsistencies in testimonies, tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's timeline. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every piece fit together too perfectly. Every attempt to shift blame only made Emily look more guilty. As the days went on, the weight of the truth became impossible to ignore. The courtroom could feel it, the inevitability of the verdict. When the jury finally returned, there was no suspense left. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision. Guilty. First-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. Emily Thompson and Bobby Lee were both convicted. The sentencing came swiftly. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole. A woman who had once handed down sentences, who had once worn the robe of justice, was now on the receiving end of the very system she had sworn to uphold. Bobby Lee, already a man with a criminal past, would never see the outside world again. The courtroom was a mix of emotions. Relief. Shock. A sense of closure. But also a lingering question, how had it come to this? How had a respected judge, a woman with everything to lose, made the choices that led her here? Michael Thompson's family sat in the front row, his mother wiping away quiet tears. Justice had been served, but it wouldn't bring him back. His fellow officers, those who had worked alongside him for years, watched as the woman responsible for his death was led away in handcuffs. The trial was over. The case was closed. But the story would never be forgotten. This case is more than just a crime story. It's a look into how power, trust, and betrayal can collide in the most devastating ways. A judge. Someone meant to uphold the law, used her position, her intelligence, and her influence not for justice, but for personal gain. She didn't just make a mistake. She crossed a line that could never be undone. A husband lost his life. A family was shattered. A community was left questioning everything they thought they knew. What drives a person to take such a path? Was it greed? Passion? A sense of invincibility that comes from years of authority? Emily Thompson had the education, the experience, and the responsibility to uphold justice. Yet, she abused it in the worst possible way. It raises unsettling questions about the people we trust in positions of power. How well do we truly know them? How can we be sure they won't use their influence to manipulate the system for their own benefit? And what about the justice system itself? It caught up with Emily in the end, but only after a man had been murdered. Only after investigators dug through the lies, the deception, the carefully hidden secrets. What if things had gone differently? What if the evidence hadn't been strong enough? Would she have walked free, back behind the bench, handing down sentences as if she hadn't planned a murder herself? There's a lesson in this story, one that goes beyond crime and punishment. Integrity isn't just a word, it's the foundation of trust in any system, especially in law enforcement and the courts. When those in power lose their way, the consequences aren't just personal. They ripple outward, affecting lives, eroding faith in institutions, making people wonder if justice is truly blind or if it can be swayed by those who know how to play the game. Maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. The idea that someone who was supposed to stand for justice could be capable of such betrayal. That the person who held the gavel, who read the law, who sat above others in a courtroom, could be the very one orchestrating a crime behind closed doors. The case of Judge Emily Thompson will be remembered not just for its shocking details, but for the questions it leaves behind. How do we stop those in power from abusing it? How do we protect the very institutions meant to protect us? And if a judge, someone sworn to uphold the law, can break it in such a calculated way, who else might be capable of the same? If you found this case shocking, just wait until you hear about the next one. A story of deception, manipulation, and a crime so twisted, it left investigators questioning everything they thought they knew. You won't want to miss it. So if you haven't already, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true crime story. What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served? Could something like this happen again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them, and your insights always bring a new perspective to these stories. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than fiction.